Ibrahim Sada picks up pieces of what's left of his car, which was torched in an attack by Israeli settlers on August 15th. Sada is a resident of Jit, a Palestinian village in the occupied West Bank, which was raided by dozens of masked Israeli settlers who descended on the village, opened fire on residents, killing a man in his 20s and injuring several others, set cars ablaze and destroyed homes and other property. According to video footage from the assault and witnesses such as Sada, who is still coming to terms with his loss.
يعني كانوا حوالي 100 ملطقة ومع مشلاع طخوا، يعني الناس اللي فزعت عنا من البلد لما سمعوا في كذا واجوا يساعدونا. الناس لما شافوا اطلاق النار يا عمي بطخوا قاعدين بطخوا رصاص، يعني الناس يعني شو بدهم يدبوا حال هاي استشهد واحد واثنين جرحى.
23-year-old Mahmoud Abdel Khorda Sada was shot dead and another Palestinian suffered critical gunshot wounds to the chest in the attack on the village east of Kalkilia. Hundreds attended Sada's funeral, with mourners carrying his body through the streets of Jit where he grew up. This is just the latest incident in a string of violent Israeli settler attacks in the occupied West Bank, which has unfolded in the shadow of Israel's war on the Gaza Strip. However, the attack on Jit, which was captured on camera unlike many other similar attacks, drew widespread condemnation not just from Palestinians but from international organizations and foreign leaders as well, including those from countries that continue to provide military and diplomatic support for Israel amid the Gaza war. In a rare acknowledgement, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said, he viewed with utmost severity the disturbances that took place in Jit, which included attacks on people and property by Israelis who entered the village. It is the Israeli army and the security forces that fight terrorism, and nobody else. Those responsible for any offense will be apprehended and tried. In a statement, a spokesperson for the US National Security Council said attacks by violent settlers against Palestinian civilians in the West Bank are unacceptable and must stop. The European Union's Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell, in a post on X, wrote, "We condemn settlers' attacks in Jit, aimed at terrorizing Palestinian civilians. Day after day, in almost total impunity, Israeli settlers fuel violence in the occupied West Bank, contributing to endanger any chance of peace. The Israeli government must stop these unacceptable actions immediately. I confirm my intention to table a proposal for EU sanctions against violent settlers enablers, including some Israeli government's members."
I hope that that investigation can ensure that those who've engaged in this settler violence over the course of the last 24 hours are brought to justice. And I raised a few weeks ago, when I was on the West Bank, that both the violence and the expansion that we have seen over recent times is unacceptable. It breaches international norms and, of course, the domestic legal norms here in Israel.
The German Foreign Office, in a post on X, said, "We condemn the violence of extremist settlers who attacked and set fires in a Palestinian village in the West Bank yesterday. One Palestinian was killed. This violence is unacceptable and the attacks must stop immediately." Francesca Albanese, the UN's Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories, said sanctions must be imposed on the State of Israel, not just individual settlers or settlement products. Time to act was decades ago, as it was not done. That time is now. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, in a statement, said, "We condemn the organized terrorism and daily crimes committed by extremist settler gangs under the protection of Israeli occupation force. We consider these assaults as part of the ongoing Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people, their land and their holy sites, in blatant violation of international humanitarian law."
Vous savez, l'Union européenne a pris des sanctions contre les colons violents en Cisjordanie. La France l'a également fait. Nous sommes vigilants et attentifs et nous dénonçons cette situation. Dans tous les cas, il faut être vigilant puisque les quelques jours aujourd'hui de discussion sont clés et tous signaux qui seraient envoyés seraient très négatifs pour la conclusion d'un accord autour d'un cessez-le-feu.
The global outcry came as settler violence against Palestinians in the West Bank has spiked particularly since October 7th due to impunity enjoyed by the settlers, as pointed out by the UN.
Yesterday's killing in Jit is not an isolated attack, and it is the direct consequence of Israel's policy of settlement in the West Bank. We have been reporting for the past years about settlers attacking Palestinian communities in their land in the West Bank with impunity, and this really is the crux of the matter, the impunity that the perpetrators of such grave violations have been enjoying. We have verified that since the 7th of October and until yesterday, 609 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and including 146 children, 8 women, and at least 4 people with a disability. Clearly, this needs to stop, and key to this will be accountability for the perpetrators.
Figures shared by another UN body, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA, show that between October 7th, 2023 and August 12th, 2024, some 1,250 Israeli settler attacks in the West Bank have taken place against Palestinians, resulting in at least 120 deaths and 1,000 incidents of property damage. Israel has for decades, as pointed out by experts, been pursuing a policy of expansion in the West Bank, but different governing coalitions have approached the same objectives with different tactics. The current far-right governing coalition, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, seems to have adopted a more accelerationist approach that aims to formalize what has for so long been a de facto reality on the ground by intensifying violent military raids and setting up new settlements since October 7th. Several Palestinians have been wounded, killed, and displaced amid violence, not just related to stepped-up settler attacks but also raids by Israeli forces. According to an Al Jazeera report, as of January 10th, 2024, nearly 6,000 Palestinians had been arrested in the West Bank since October 7th, 2023. An estimated 3,000 were being held under administrative detention, wherein individuals can be arrested and detained by Israel without trial.
There have been attacks by settlers, by Israeli security forces as well, against Palestinians in the West Bank. And by and large, we are seeing impunity. There have been some very few investigations, but even in those cases, most of the times, these do not conclude with justice for the victims and for the perpetrators. There are reports of Israeli security forces standing by as attacks take place. There are even reports of weapons being distributed to the settlers. So there is clearly a state responsibility in this regard.
When the UN spokesperson Shamdasani alluded to reports of weapons being distributed to settlers, she was referring to far-right Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir's announcement in November 2023 that his ministry was purchasing 10,000 assault rifles, helmets and body armor to arm settler militias in the West Bank. Before the current war on Gaza, near-daily military raids and attacks on Palestinians by settlers in 2023 made it the deadliest year for Palestinians in the West Bank since 2005, the year the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA, began recording casualties. OCHA said the number of Palestinians displaced in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, has more than doubled since October 7th, compared with the preceding 10 months. Some 3,070 Palestinians have been forced from their homes due to demolitions, Israeli settler violence, and land confiscations in the past 10 months, compared with 1,252 in the previous period, according to the UN agency. The UN agency said that some 181,000 people in the West Bank had been affected at least once by demolitions, destruction of roads, water and sanitation facilities, and other public infrastructure since October 7th, mainly during Israeli military raids in Tulkarem and Jenin. Following its win in the December 2022 election, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government made the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank a top priority. In 1987, there were just 60,000 Israeli settlers living in the West Bank, excluding East Jerusalem. By 2005, this had quadrupled to 247,300, and by 2021 it had reached 465,400. Earlier, in June 2023, Israel's government approved plans for thousands of new Jewish settlement units in the occupied West Bank, giving the far-right finance minister Bezalel Smotrich, who is also the head of the settlements administration, sweeping powers to expedite the construction considered illegal under international law. The policy change eased and expedited the process of approving new Jewish settlement construction. Smotrich, who lives in an illegal settlement himself, has pushed openly for more Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank as steps towards eventual annexation. However, the attack in Jit prompted an unusually strong condemnation from the far-right minister, who described the incident as an anarchist criminal violence, probably because of the international outcry. The controversial minister earlier drew severe criticism when he openly called for a Palestinian village in the West Bank to be wiped out.
לציוץ של פעיל ימין, דודי בן ציון, שכתב בטוויטר אחרי הפיגוע הרצחני, את הכפר חווארה צריך למחוק היום.
כי אני חושב שאת הכפר חווארה צריך למחוק. אני חושב שמדינת ישראל צריכה לעשות את זה. חס וחלילה, לא אנשים פרטיים.
Such statements by a cabinet minister of Israel only encourage more violence against the millions of Palestinians living under occupation, fear experts. With most settler attacks focused on farmers and shepherds, the settlers have not only pushed Palestinians out of their ancestral lands, but have also deprived them of their traditional occupation. And with settlement expansion being a government policy, there seems to be no respite in sight for the Palestinian residents of the occupied lands.